screen. Let's see. Something. I love this error message. Something went wrong.
We don't know that.
Refreshed. Yeah, I mean, you know what? I'm gonna choose to ignore this.
Okay.
I'm gonna choose to ignore this message as if it was a false positive SCA alert. How about that?
That is
Yeah.
fair.
So happy Friday. Thank you for joining me on a Friday morning.
Oh, absolutely. Your Friday morning. It's afternoon for me at this point.
All right. Yeah. Where are you based?
Charlotte, North Carolina.
Yeah. So let's you and I actually didn't have too many opportunities to connect. So before I start drilling you on AI and all of these things, can you tell me about your last job before Andor Labs? Like, what were you doing day in day out? What were you in charge of?
Yeah, sure. So I was at Yahoo. I actually touched almost every pillar of security at Yahoo, but the last few years before moving over, basically I was leading programs, at the intersection really of AppSec, behavioral engineering, strategy, technical, some training. So my day to day was really embedding security into like the DNA of how teams were building our products there. So whether that was really, launching secure by design, guiding roadmap strategies, cloud transitions, um, into secure realities essentially. So um, I also was had just handed off our security champion program. So basically setting the stage, I was in ProdSec, but AppSec, AppSec secures the code and ProdSec secures the whole product from beginning to end. So I was in ProdSec doing AppSec work, if that makes sense.
Do you see ProdSec and AppSec as two different things, or do you use that interchangeably?
I see it as two different things. I always look at like, cybersecurity as a whole as being the umbrella, right? And then you have your pieces under the umbrella: security awareness, behavioral engineering, threat, um, incident response, ProdSec, GRC, governance risk and compliance, and then you have, your product security where, your AppSec really lives. So I look at that as like underneath the ProdSec umbrella.
So your job, would you say it was more organizational or more implementing for example, rolling out SaaS, rolling out SCA, rolling out container security, or were you more working on the people, rolling out those things?
I was a little bit of both. So we didn't really delineate in silos because security, had to scale at velocity. And so I focused on securing what we built and what we ran, and that included the people and the tooling. But especially, let's just talk about SCA for a minute. When we rolled out our SCA, I worked with a gentleman named Chris Madden, and he really focused on the tooling side, and I focused on the rolling out and the launch and the people side of how they consumed the tool and how they were going to utilize it to best fit into their, product and their, shift left, secure by design situation, and making sure that it was, sometimes it's not a one size fits all for every team. So making sure that they had the necessary tools and education to be able to use the tool correctly.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you don't mind, let's dig into that a little bit. So, you're rolling out an SEA tool. Let's say there was a whole technical selection process. You selected a tool that you like. Um, Obviously, Endor Labs is the most amazing, tool ever. All of that. But let's say you selected tool X, whatever it is, and now you want to make sure that people actually use it. So it sounds like you were in charge of let's roll this out and let's make sure this actually gets consumed. And I'm assuming you mean on both sides of the aisle with security and the engineering teams. So what was step one? What did you and like I mean from the perspective of was it a Google Doc that says here the checklist of everything that you do? What was step one in order to ensure that this SEA tool actually gets used?
Yeah, I mean, it was understanding the tool first, right? So to make sure that it was consumable and even the pain points of other tools for the product teams that were using it. So, knowing what might have been blockers for them when we introduced an IAC SaaS or whatnot. But with SCA, it was literally a Confluence page where we first said, okay, here's, what the tool does, how it stands, what a false positive looks like, how to check off your false positives and focus on your real threats. And so that was a Confluence page that got built. And then once the tool was up and ready and scanning, we actually then had a dashboard that was live that hooked in to all of the product teams, the repos and everything that needed to be behind it. And then we rolled out a comms plan. It was really like a marketing push of, hey teams, we want you to get behind this. Here's how it's going to benefit you in all of these ways. Especially with, making you more secure, being able to fix it before it hits, that PR live in the cycle and downstream where you might have to stop for a critical and be an all hands on deck. So really explaining to them the benefits of it in that launch plan, and our CISO was a big part too of going to his leadership partners and saying, we want you guys to adopt this. And so it was a great rollout. It was really, everybody had a little bit to do with it. So
Yeah. And then once you did this big launch, because I mean, from the way you're talking about it, it's not um, dissimilar from like a product launch, right? That we would work on in product marketing. Because you do this big launch, you make everybody internally and externally understand why this would be beneficial to them, but then you have to keep reinforcing it. So, what did day two look like after the launch?
after the launch, you have your early adopters, right? People who jumped on it immediately got it done, whether it's because they're those people that can't stand to have something on their checklist, so they did it, or because they really saw the value in it. Day two, you know, I would say not day two. I would say like week two or week three, right? When those early adopters start to slow down and you're starting to see, that bell curve start to kind of go off. Well, that's when you hit them with that second push, right? Those Slack messages, those reminders, those, hey, leadership, here's the dashboard. Take a look and see where your team falls. You never wanted to actually call out anybody, not doing a request, but more of like promoting and actually praising those that had. And so just getting that attention back around the launch, and just a reminder, because whether people are out on vacation or it just falls off their radar, you always have to have that second and third and fourth push, to kind of to kind of get you where you need to be.
Yeah. So, but and all of that was planned ahead of time, or was that mostly you just chasing people down, giving praise where praise is due, or was that planned out? Like, okay, this is how we're going to track everybody down and make sure they actually use this damn thing that we spent all this money on.
Yeah, it was a full comms plan. So, before we would launch, or I would launch anything, I always had, okay, here's what we're doing week one, week two, week three. Here's the list of people that we need to hit, whether it's like leadership or the product leads or even the developers themselves. Here's all of our communications channels we want to make sure to tap into some way, even up to like an all company all hands. Let's get it on their radar up front early with the company all hands, and then
Hmm.
you'll hit them in Slack, you'll hit them in email, um, whatever your source of truth for company rollouts are.
Yeah. I love how you know, close to marketing
Yeah.
all that is really. Yeah. Jen has this really great talk that she does, that she's delivered at OWASP and B-Sides, about this exactly, right? About selling the program internally. Yeah, I find all of that fascinating, but let's talk a little bit about AI as well, because I think in this day and age, you kind of get fined if you don't talk about AI enough, right?
Are people not
So,
over AI yet? What?
well, I mean, I don't know, because I feel like there's always these bubbles that get created. Like I can tell you, in the world of marketing, at least, where obviously it's one of the first areas, like ChatGPT writing and all of these things. It was writing content, it was writing code. First two
Hmm.
areas that got impacted very, very heavily. Obviously, automation got a lot better and all these things. But looking around and just talking to my peers at other companies, I can tell you that I'm seeing at scale adoption where, okay, it's just table stakes now. I think that what you see on like LinkedIn and TikTok and Instagram and all of that is still very, very far ahead and non-representative of reality at most companies. I think most people are still doing their jobs the same way they did them last year, and are probably due for a pretty rude awakening at some point. But my question to you is, do you think that's true for AppSec? Like, do you think maybe not even the fact that hey, we're using AI generated code and all these things and we need to figure out a way to secure it, more the day to day of an application security engineer or an application security leader? Do you think that changes significantly now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say it's really kind of shaped the way of the work. The focus is really shifting from those traditional guardrails to more like a proactive design influence approach. So, threat modeling isn't just, about known risk, it's about identifying those emerging patterns that AI assisted development is bringing in. Code reviews becoming more strategic, it's less about syntax. You got to make sure that the AI understands that content and that context and intent and impact that you're actually bringing in with every prompt. And then the velocity. I think AI is just moving so fast. Security really hasn't caught up to it. You're still doing your everyday tasks, and it's harder for us to make reason about to reason about it because you have the company saying we want you to use all this AI. Well,
Yeah.
okay, how are we going to secure all this AI in this hybrid environment? It's really a complexity. It's compounding those complexities, I believe.
Yeah, and I mean, I wonder. So you're obviously very kind of connected into the industry. Are those the conversations that you're hearing, where application security leaders are sitting in meetings where, the CISOs are banging on the table, like we just spent $3 million on Cursor or on Copilot or on Windsurf, and we're rolling out AI generated code, and go figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping so. I think, a lot more of what I hear from a security standpoint is, security is really a recommendation. There's not laws and legal, pushes to where, you have to have secure AI, at least not yet. I think we're getting there.
Hmm.
But, GDPR in Europe's probably the closest thing to like actual legals. It's more about fines and stuff. But um, I think they want to be at a seat at the table when that AI is being brought in, right? So that they can secure it. But at the same time, if you don't know what's in your environment, you have HR or, another team that's just bringing in a tool to be utilized. Are you getting eyes on that before it's let loose in the environment? You may or may not know, but I'm hoping most security teams are at least finding out.
Yeah, and it goes beyond AppSec, right? Because if I'm out here, like I've become addicted to V0. V0 and Vercel is my vibe coding tool of choice, right? And every authentication into these tools, and especially if you're then generating code and you're hosting that on your organizational GitHub repo and all these things. There could be I probably am guilty of this, of generating code that nobody knows about in this organization that is very security minded, right? So I was thinking about it yesterday as I was playing around with V0, of if what I'm doing right now is happening at scale, there's so much of this shadow AI code that's being injected into organizational code bases, that how would anybody know about, right? So yeah, um, I mean, do you think that like what's the temperature check that you're getting? Do you think that application security folks are resistant to this change, or a little bit scared of AI? Should they be? I think if you could provide like guidance or advice, like what would it be?
Yeah, I don't know if like scared is the right word. I think it's not fear, it's more like an inflection point, right? So the role of AppSec is really expanding from that gatekeeper of, that static strategic enable from checklist executor essentially to like system thinker because these autonomous agents are coming into our environment. So, we're not just securing the code anymore, but it's how the code's getting created, how it's evolving, how it integrates into a living, breathing ecosystem. So, if I were to give them advice, I would treat, AI the same way we treat code, right? Map it to all the AI layers, input, auth, inference, output, logging, all that good stuff. And, reminding the devs to think like a security engineer, like what could go wrong if I ship this code or if that model calls this code, because in reality at this point, behavior is essentially a vulnerability. We don't know, if you don't have the right prompt, what could come out of that prompt downstream. So I always think of like the attack surface and the stack when you're securing that, right? So where are the models running? Which agents do we have running? What's being called? So obviously you got to start by defining it, locking down those permissions. Yeah, I can give you a
Yeah.
hundred different ideas.
Behavior is a vulnerability. What a good line.
I love
I'm gonna steal that and put that everywhere.
when we were changing security awareness to behavioral engineering, that was a line that I always like to use, behaviors of vulnerability, because people are your first line of defense, and the same with AI now. Their behaviors of vulnerability. So how do we lock that down?
Yeah, and it's interesting because we were talking about this with Dimitri when we did our vibe coding webinar. So, for anybody watching, this is we did a webinar where essentially we had our CTO build a an application live. We used Cursor for it. Obviously, we went very wild with it with very little guardrails, but we generated an unbelievable amount of security vulnerabilities within 5 minutes of us trying to build this app. And we just discussed what came out of it. And one of the things that he really talked about was that in when you're using prompts in order to build applications, moving forward, we'll have to also understand what prompt informed which behavior, and that has to be visible in the PR or somewhere in the comment. Today it isn't, right? But
Well,
you have to understand which prompt created which vulnerability, and that pretty fundamentally changes how you go about securing these things.
yeah, I love that, and Dimitri is so smart because that's a big part of it is like that prompt logging, right? So to understand those downstream agents, if you don't know how do we say that? If there's no way to trace it, there's no way to know the behavior that happened. So there's no way to have incident response. And so, that's that last phase of the AI workflow is making sure you have that logging in place.
Yeah,
And then hit it with
100%. So
adversarial prompts.
so you were working on the alien inspired security architecture. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so ASA, I love it. We called it alien-inspired architecture, for the AI, but in reality, it's the AI secure framework of AI, or ASA. So AI security architecture. But what we were doing there is just, we wanted to figure out. We were reading all this and hearing all these things in the industry, and I have to give Andrew, a big shout out here because he brought me one hell of an idea of like, okay, well all these things are out there and what we keep hearing is like, well, how do we secure it, how do we secure it? And so I ended up going down a million rabbit holes about, well, what's actually in place, what is actionable advice. And that was something an old leader used to tell me is if we're not giving actionable advice, are we really giving advice? So um, so I had read like there was all these like grand ideas, NIST, MITRE, MLOps, OWASP, and each one of them had different ideas of how to go about it, but there was no true framework or no true model to bring all those ideas together. So ASA kind of came out of that. And this is where it's not really a checklist, it's an operational framework built to how you can secure AI at speed. So it's a blueprint to anchor controls into each phase of the AI workflow. And it's recommendations that teams and companies dependent of size can go and see what works for their particular company.
And what do you think? So I'll kind of go back to my question on the rollout of the SEA tool that we talked about earlier. What is step one?
Yeah, so step one is build time, right? So you got your build time, your run time, and your break time. But um, build time, this is where you are, and we use define, design, and deploy to kind of mimic build time, run time, break time. But in define, it's it breaks out into other components. But getting into each one of those would be a little bit too much today. You're really looking at like, okay, we're going to map our landscape, right? Where's the control over our data origin? Where's our data coming from? Because if you don't know where your data lives, you don't know what you need to secure for your AI. So, trusted prompt sources, there, make sure that you're only giving it the access that it needs. So we're going back to that least privilege principle, and that's where we're going to start with scoping those roles. And that's where.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're chatting with an AppSec team now, and what we're hearing, at least from customers, is the amount of code that's being produced is, it's a tidal wave. It's 10xing because the amount of code that's being produced per engineer, and also what some people are calling citizen engineers, which I guess is referring to people like me who are not engineers but are now producing code, and someone has to secure that code. Um, and there was even one conversation where I heard myself say this, and I could hear Dimitri yelling at me in my mind, where I was like, "But I told V0 do a security check and make sure it's the code is secure," and it gave me the thumbs up. It said it's all good, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Um, so just the amount and the complexity and the layering of this code is becoming so much, and yet I don't think that many of these companies are also on AppSec hiring sprees, right? Increasing headcount in AppSec teams by orders of magnitude. So, what do you think that individually AppSec people should be doing right now to prepare or to kind of level themselves up a little bit? What conversations should they be having internally?
Oh man, yeah, that's a loaded question because everybody kind of hits it differently. But I think the conversation that they should be having is that we do need to have secure AI, and like, how do we do that? So how do we actually get AI into a position where we can, I I was saying when I was giving a presentation on ASA the other day that, well, let's start small, that crawl walk run approach, but let's do it with AI, right? Let's start with one model and let's secure that to the best of our ability. So, use the framework, use all the recommendations and the implementations of how to secure AI, right? And then you can use that AI to secure the rest. So if you know that you can trust one of them, and then you can just use it to run against your other AI systems. That's a great conversation to have. It might be a little um, pie in the sky, I guess, because who's having the time to do that. But when you think about it, if you put forward the resources early, right? What's the return on investment look like for you? So you have 3 or 4 amazing AppSec folks out there securing that one AI, through the whole model of data inference, prompt injection, prompt logging, getting all that in place, and really, that authorization layer too, like when it goes through that auth check before that model call. You have that AI that's like super tight, and then you stress test it, you red team it, you give it all you got, and if it passes, well, okay, let's do a test rollout, super small. But yeah, I think if we can get at least like one AI secure in your infrastructure, you can use it. Obviously you need to keep a human in the loop, but you could use it to start securing the rest of your AI.
Yeah. Is it your perspective, just based off of your experience in a technology company, that it really is at the end of the day just compliance that will drive behavior here, or do you feel like there's because I hear that a lot of until there's no compliance standards, like compliance drives security, and that's it. I've heard that so many times. I also heard people rail against that concept with the genuine desire to ship secure software by default. So interested to get your take.
I I am in the latter. I think secure software by default is where I would fall. I think compliance is really really great, but compliance is not security. And it's the same thing with privacy and legal and all that good stuff. It's the same coin, but it's two completely different sides of the coin. And so I think shipping secure AI by default is where we need to be. I Will legal and standards ever come about, globally for that? Who knows? I think, But, right now I think there's enough security-minded individuals, and even developers, they want to do the right thing, right? It's not like they
Mhm.
want to go out there and ship insecure code. Um, so I think there's enough people out there thinking, I don't want to be that breach attack, that vulnerability that lets it out. So, um, yeah, secure by default for sure.
Yeah, yeah. That I mean, that's interesting because I remember I used to work for a company where we did serverless security. We did security for AWS Lambda and all that kind of stuff. And it was very cutting edge. It was very much the new thing at the time. And then we used to get a lot of pushback of like, all this is great, but I'm barely doing containers, right? And we were in our little bubble of like, what do you mean? Like, containers are yesterday's news, right? And I think that we're seeing a little bit of that happen again today, because one of the pieces of advice, I asked a similar question on a customer call the other day, and the advice was, all of this is great, but also when you're having these internal conversations, make sure that you occasionally remind people of that 15-year-old Java repo that, or, if you're an airline, the app that people use to check into flights is not AI, right? That still needs to be maintained. That has its whole infrastructure. So you have to, yes, absolutely plan for the next decade of software development, but don't forget about the previous several decades of software development. Every era that had its own revolution, and how we went from the microservice, from monoliths to microservices to Bazel monorepos, like all these different things, and each time it was the end all be all. All of that stack still exists. Is that something you had to deal with?
Oh my goodness. Legacy. Exactly. I think, when you think about legacy infrastructure coexisting with AI, modern code, and that complexity, I mean, I just remember trying to get, even just, just old lines of code out. Like, have
Mm-hmm.
we archived? Have we actually like sunset some of this stuff that's no longer there? And so, keeping pace with the future and actually dealing with that legacy as well. That's a great conversation. I think the people that have to worry about those things, the large older companies, even Google now oh, I'm sure they have some legacy code that they're dealing with, right? So how do we make sure that we're doing that? I might not. I don't know if I have a great answer for that one, to be honest with you, Ron.
I don't think these things, yeah, I don't think these things necessarily have great answers, but I think it's conversations that you have to have, because
Mhm.
increasingly something from last week is legacy,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
I guess it's more of like a orchestration of security across generations of architecture, like, and keeping
mhm.
pace with the future. Man, I do not envy some of the leaders that are dealing with this.
I got another hard one for you before we wrap up.
Hmm.
The Do you think that, looking, a few years down the line, with everything that we're seeing so many application security people with really strong software engineering backgrounds, and we're seeing this kind of move back and forth. We've even seen CISOs in certain organizations divest from AppSec and ProdSec and kind of move that into CTO org. Do you think that there will be a consolidation of application security and engineering orgs, DevSecOps, obviously, platform engineering, all these things? Do you see those things kind of being consolidated under engineering and the CTO orgs, or do you think that it will keep sort of working the way it works today, where you have your AppSec that rolls into the larger cybersecurity org?
So interesting enough, at Yahoo, the our cybersecurity org rolled into the CTO org. So our CISO rolled into the CTO.
Mm-hmm.
I did see a big push on, especially with such a robust security champions program that I had built at Yahoo. Um, a lot of the tasks moving over into engineering, or us at least inserting a security minded individual that also understood the stack of what they were building, having a seat at that table to where they were making sure that it was being built securely as well, but having a touch point in ProdSec, right? So you've got 10 engineers on platform engineering, and one of them had a direct connection to our platform engineering project person, right? So they're constantly working together to make sure it's pushed out. um, do I think security at AppSec is going to go away from security org altogether? I don't think so, just simply because I think there's always going to be threats that are emerging that engineering teams aren't going to be able to focus on, right? So you're always going to need a security team that understands the bad actors, the nefarious people that are trying to break you all the time, and how we secure against those. And I just think that's too much for one person to do, in all honesty.
Yeah, that makes sense. Amazing. I'm learning so much from you. This is great. This is one of those things where I love doing, live streams, and I love doing these types of things, but just the benefit of like, hey, we're gonna spend 30 minutes just talking about these things and not talking about work is so beneficial. And I'm gonna get a T-shirt that says "Behavior is a vulnerability." That one was just so good.
I really enjoyed this. Thank you for asking me to do it. I really appreciate it. I had a lot of fun today.
Yeah, yeah. So, we are hopefully going to do this every Friday, where I will coerce a different person to teach me about these things. And awesome, Bonnie. Thank you so much. I'll let you go, and we'll cut the live stream here. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.